Check the mic.
Blah, blah, blah. 7 years ago, we'll pretend that us politicians actually care what anybody thinks, so you'll all be dumb enough to vote for us and let us extort and control you and stomp on you. Yay.
What's up, Freedom Fiends? It's Neema Vedadi. Today, another Neema solo joint. We'll be speaking with Larken Rose. He's a self-described tax heretic, enemy of the state, and all-around nice guy. He's the author of several books, including The Most Dangerous Superstition. We're talking about the government there, obviously. Countless articles, and some great YouTube videos. Larken and his family also play freedom music. I twisted some of that up into the beat for this intro. Larken is unapologetic and unconditionally committed to ending the federal income tax, and more importantly, the more fundamental fraud underlying the entire notion of government and authority. So go ahead and check it out. Hopefully you'll learn something, Freedom Fiends. Hey, Freedom Fiends, this is Neema Vedadi. I have with me Larken Rose. How you doing today, Larken?
Pretty good.
You want me to call you Larken, Mr. Rose? You have any
preference?
Oh,
Mr. Rose sounds way too weird. Larken will do fine.
Mr. Rose does sound a bit formal, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough.
Makes me sound like a politician or something.
Yeah, we wouldn't want that.
The Honorable Mr. Rose. None of that.
None of that. Okay, fair enough. Well, I sort of pre-recorded a little intro there. You didn't get to hear it, but our fans will. But what I'd first like to start off with is, you are pretty much a libertarian rock star, at least in my opinion. I'd like to know what you've been working on lately.
Well, I've been doing a bunch of fairly simple YouTube videos, which is usually just me in front of a cheap camera babbling on for 5 or 10 minutes. Just because I find that when I write things, a certain number of people will read them, but it's mainly people who either already agree with me or agree so much with me that it sort of seems pointless. Whereas a YouTube video, anybody can say, hey, look at this. And it seems to reach a lot more people who would otherwise never hear about the sort of ideas that I talk about and you talk about, the whole general topic of real freedom. And so I've been focusing more on YouTube videos that really usually each one just has a very simple point that, I try to just make it so simple that people go, whoa, yeah, he sort of has a point, and then forward it around rather than trying to, explain the whole world in 5 minutes.
Right.
Just some little tidbit to get people's attention.
Right. And you really have a knack for that. In fact, I think the first time I ever saw you was a video you did called "I'm Allowed to Rob You."
I think that was there you name. Go. That's the only reason you know who I am is because of that stupid little video.
Yeah, and I just came across it. I don't even know if it was linked to something. I just somehow came across it, and I was sort of on my journey. I don't think I am where I was. I don't think I was where I am now, as far as being an anarcho-capitalist and believing that government doesn't have any right to basically rob you. But I saw this video, and you just put it in such simple terms. You basically said, I don't really feel like making my own money. It's kind of hard, so I figured out a solution. Me and my friends got together, had a formal meeting, signed this declaration of the right to rob you. So, it's legit, and I'm going to come over to your house, and you'll have to give me all your stuff. And it was just drenching in this wonderful sarcasm, and it just sort of drove the point home to me that, even with the Constitution, there was people who I didn't know. I didn't agree to it. I didn't sign any contract. So what gives anybody the right to just meet somewhere, even if it is Washington, D.C., and decide my fate?
Right, like if their buildings are fancy enough and they wear nifty wigs and they write these big, eloquent, long-winded documents, somehow they can alter morality.
Right.
And we were all trained to believe that. I believed that for most of my life because I never thought about it. So yeah, what I tried to do with videos like that is just try to nag people into thinking about some of the assumptions that we all have in us. They were put there intentionally, and hardly anybody ever takes a minute to think about it. Like, wait, how did they? We know all the civics 101 garbage. Well, we elect them, and there's a House and a Senate, and there's a president, and it has blah, blah, blah. But people don't get back to the basics of, wait a minute, how on earth could anybody, I don't care how many rituals and scribbles and magic, political bizarre things they do, how can anyone acquire the right to steal what I earn without my permission? loony.
Right. Well, they skip that part in school. They go directly to, to history and how it happened and how it works, the procedural stuff. Like you said, there's a House and there's a Senate and we vote, and isn't that great? And they just skip over any philosophical argument as to why it should work completely, other than the glittering generality of, we all live in a society and stuff like that. Sort of Murray Rothbard's, historical non sequitur, that just because there's a society doesn't mean there needs to be a state. That also brings me back to, I'm glad you mentioned that, because where I was sort of going with telling you that, your video, I'm Allowed to Rob You, influenced me so much is, how did you get to where you're at? How did you sort of come across these ideas and develop into who you are today?
Well, I was raised conservative, sort of in the direction of libertarian, even though I just made a video complaining about people who say they're libertarian on some issues. But just sort of that constitutionalist general outlook on the world. And I love debating and arguing about this and that and the other thing. And I also like winning when I argue. And I find that if I'm inconsistent with myself, I lose. And so it was really just a matter of whenever I would debate things, whether it's, a hostile debate or discussing things with my wife, Tessa, or something, whenever your position contradicts itself, it feels uncomfortable. So after a debate, I'd think, all right, I obviously argued myself into a corner because there's something there that doesn't match. So let's look and find out which part of it was wrong and get rid of that. And so I basically started with government should be really little and should only do A, B, and C, and kept going back and whittling it down and saying, well, no, it can't really have the right to do this. It can't really have the right to tax, even if it's like for the common good and, for the military or something to protect. Even if I think it's good for my neighbor, I don't have the right to force him by way of voting or on my own or anything else to fund something, even if I really think it would benefit him. So I just sort of kept whittling away, and eventually the whole thing fell down and evaporated, and I realized there can't be legitimate government. Like, I kept arguing for this thing, and it got smaller and smaller and smaller until I whittled off the last chip and there was nothing there. And I said, what should be the organization, the cooperation, there's lots of great stuff that should be, but it isn't government. It doesn't deserve the label government if it's not a coercive ruling class. And there can't be a legitimate coercive ruling class. So it sort of fell down to nothing, and I said, well, darn, I guess I'm an anarchist.
Did you say darn when that moment dawned on you?
Yeah, it wasn't actually just one moment, but yeah, it really is existentially disturbing to let go, because we're trained to think that the solution to all the problems in the world is to have the right guy on the throne. And so, all of politics is arguing who should be on the throne. And to spend your whole life doing that and then suddenly come to the realization that the problem isn't the guy on the throne, it's the throne. There shouldn't be a throne for a guy to be on.
Exactly.
It's a complete change of how you view the world. And that's, it was uncomfortable for me. It was uncomfortable for just about everybody I know. We're all trained into authoritarianism and statism. And all the way letting go of that is uncomfortable. It's basically admitting, wow, one of the fundamental assumptions of the way I viewed society and the world was totally bogus. So kind of have to start over.
I found for me it became uncomfortable at first, but once I got used to it, it just seemed so much better. Like you said, arguing becomes easier because you can argue consistently. You can just say, well, force is wrong. That's it. I win the argument. If you're claiming government should do something, I win the argument. So now I want to get back to something else. You object to taxation, things like that, on grounds of principle. But I don't really know a lot of the history, other than looking around on the internet today. You actually went to jail, and they brought you up on charges of, I don't know if it was tax evasion or what exactly it was. And you tried to use the government's own laws to say, hey, wait, even in your own arbitrary rules, you're sort of not following that. Tell us first a little bit about that argument. I think on Wiki it told me it was the 861 argument. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, and usually the extortion apologists write most of the stuff you read about me, so I'll give you the accurate version.
Okay.
Yeah, the 861 evidence is sort of the shorthand description of it. It has to do with Section 861 of the Internal Revenue Code, or more importantly, the regulations that go along with it. Now, not to get all into the details of that, basically the federal income tax, as they wrote it in their own rules, is not what most people think it is. The short, slight oversimplification is it's a tax on international trade because that's the type of commerce that the federal government has jurisdiction over. Now, again, that's oversimplified and really short. A lot of people wondered. I was already an anarchist before I knew anything about the issue and anything about the tax, tax law or anything like that. And a lot of people asked me, well, why get into that? Because, I say that the philosophical issue is what matters. It's sort of like a slave saying, hey, master, look, in your rule book that you made up, it says I'm actually supposed to be free next year.
Right.
And that's
then he just cracks the whip and says, shut up, slave.
Right, shut up. Here, go sit in this cage for a year. And so in a way, it doesn't particularly matter what their rules say. But my only hope was that because almost everybody worships the state and feels this obligation to bow to the politicians, I had some hope that maybe all those statists would sort of care that they weren't even being, quote unquote, legally robbed. They were being lied to and defrauded and extorted, not even within the rules written by the parasites. And so I brought up the issue, and it thousands of people learned about it and found it interesting and spread it around. But after a point, with the obvious example being the jurors in my case, it became obvious that the evidence didn't matter. The law, even quote unquote, the law didn't matter. What matters to almost everyone is the one message they're taught throughout their life, which is if you do as you're told, you're a good person. If you don't do as you're told, you're a bad person. So we had a trial, and it wasn't actually tax evasion. It was misdemeanor willful failure to file. I spent a year in a cage because I didn't send them pieces of paper.
Really?
That's really morally legit. Because I didn't hide anything, and they admitted in their motions he didn't hide anything. He told us what he was doing from the beginning. So the trial, I basically got all of the government witnesses to admit that, yeah, he believes his income isn't taxable and he's not subject to this. And there's something called willfulness in all federal tax crimes where if you thought you were in compliance with the law, there's no crime. If you happen to be wrong, they can try to collect money from you, but it's not supposed to be a crime because like anybody could know what all the tax laws say. But there's that element to every tax crime. So the court and the prosecution and me, of course, we all agreed, the only question here is whether I believed I was required to file, because the judge is going to tell them, I'll say what the law is, and he'll get it wrong and lie through his teeth, but there's nothing I can do about that in his courtroom. But the question was, did I believe? And the judge instructed the jury, not that they were paying attention or had 3 brain cells to comprehend it, but he told the jury, if you even conclude that there's a reasonable doubt about whether he thought he was required to file or not, you have to find him not guilty. So here's this trial. The prosecutor, the judge, and all of their witnesses admitted in front of the jury that I believed I wasn't required to file, that my income wasn't taxable, and they still said guilty.
Wow.
Because I think literally all they could process was they told him he was supposed to pay and he didn't. And that was the prosecution's entire case. They never went into like my issue and my explanation of beliefs and said, here's what he got wrong. Their entire case was, we kept telling him he had to pay. That was it. They didn't say why. They never cited anything. They never rebutted anything I brought up. And anyway, make a long story short, my goal was in the hopes that, my intention was that maybe all the people who worship the state will sort of care that the people they bow to are not just taxing them, but actually defrauding them, breaking their own rules to the tune of a couple $1 trillion a year. As it turns out, most people don't care. They don't. It doesn't even register. The only thing that stays stuck in their head is, I do as I'm told, which usually comes out as, I pay my taxes.
Yep.
And I say, wait, they're not even your taxes. If you look at what the law says. But people can't even get that far. It really is like a loyal slave who it doesn't matter what you say to him. If it ends in, so you should run away, he can't process it.
Right.
He can only view a runaway slave as an evil, nasty thief, no matter what. Doesn't matter the reasons, doesn't matter how much you explain it, doesn't matter the basis of running away. All they can see is you're a bad slave. You ran away. Right. Or you tried to run away.
Well, the state has try to say, the state's based on consent of the governed and yada yada, but really it's about the obedience of the governed. And like you show in your video, The Tiny Dot, we massively outnumber them. The people being governed massively outnumber the people doing the governing. And we talk about it in our podcast. We call it, horizontal enforcement, things like that. And obedience, it's basically people are taught this, and if we could get them to realize the truth, then that's where the problem lies. The problem doesn't lie in the tiny dot. The problem lies in the rest of the dots.
Absolutely. And I'm constantly saying that because people are out there protesting and petitioning government and trying to elect this and that and the other thing. And I keep saying the problem is not in Washington, D.C. Yeah, there are a bunch of lying crooks, but the problem is not there and the solution is not there. The problem is in the heads of 300 million people who actually imagine they have a moral obligation to bow to those psychos and do what they say. If that goes away, if the people say, wait a minute, I don't have to bow to anyone. I follow my own conscience. I do what I think is right. Mm-hmm. I don't have to pay tribute to some master. If the people understand that, they don't need an election. They don't need a revolution. They don't need anything. They're already free.
Right.
It's that they don't know it. And when everybody but one person doesn't know that they're free, the one person who says, we should be free, he gets stomped on and thrown in a cage by his fellow slaves who say, no, we shouldn't. We should be slaves. We're good, loyal slaves, and we do as we're told. And you're the bad guy because you didn't bow and kiss the ring.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? And what do you think? I mean, obviously, things, your whole body of work, what me and Michael are doing, what a lot of people are doing right now, especially with the advent of the internet, is trying to break that. And I think you've coined a phrase called the most dangerous superstition. Is that what you're attacking when you say that phrase? And what do you think the steps are towards getting rid of that dangerous superstition, which I'm assuming is the government, the idea that somebody else has control over us?
Right. It's the belief in authority, specifically now the belief in government, which are almost the same thing now. Once upon a time, the authority that ruled the world would be like the church that says we're allowed to go around and stomp on sinners. Well, churches now don't do that. Governments do that. But the belief that you have a master that you're obligated to bow to, that is the most dangerous superstition. If I actually planned ahead, I should have sent you a copy of my book called The Most Dangerous Superstition, which just digs into, because it really is a superstition. It isn't, I always sort of imagined government was just sort of like a practical way of dealing with problems of society and organizing things. And it's not. You dig down to the basis of it, and it makes exactly as much sense as believing in Santa Claus. It's hallucinating something that doesn't make any sense and doesn't do any good that you desperately hope will save you from reality, which is we need a few people who have an exemption from morality. They're allowed to steal. They're allowed to murder. They're allowed to boss us around and stomp on us and throw us in cages even if we didn't hurt anybody, because that's necessary for society. That's right. What we're all told. It's completely batty. And like you said before, when you escape the belief, then it's so obvious. It's so easy to be consistent, and it makes perfect sense. But it really is a matter of deprogramming people from the cult of government, because it's completely a programmed-in belief. The whole belief in authority. I mean, that's what school does. Never mind reading and writing and arithmetic and the things it pretends to teach. What school teaches children is, if you obey, you're good. If you disobey, you're bad. If you obey, you're good. If you disobey, you're bad. That's the message that comes through everything. And when they come out of school, they have no idea how to be human beings. Mm-mm. The first thing they do is look around and say, who's in charge of me? They can't fathom the idea that they're in charge of themselves. They really can't.
Yeah. I remember when I was in school, what I remember was the best strategy to be successful, and I was pretty successful academically in school. The best strategy was just paraphrasing what the teacher or the professor or the school book said. It wasn't thinking for yourself, it was paraphrasing.
Yep, I got good grades for a long time. I was near the top of my class, and it didn't occur to me till a lot later what a huge, ridiculous joke the whole thing is. But that's the message that, nobody thinks that's what they're teaching. But if you look at the environment, I mean, these are somebody's most formative years. He spends most of it sitting in a room where they don't have to tell him these things. He experiences it. He learns that there are two classes of people, the masters and the subjects. They're the subjects, the teachers are the masters. You talk when the master says it's okay. Mm-hmm. You do what the master tells you to do. You don't do anything else. If you want to do anything, you ask the master. If he says no, you're out of luck. If he says yes and by his good graces allows you to do something, you grovel and say, oh, thank you, master. And it's just, school is one giant example of how to live your life in a prison. And then you step out the doors and people think, all right, where's the next prison warden? Like, who am I beholden to now?
You're listening to the Freedom Fiends podcast, available from freedomfiends.com. That's FREEDOMFEENS.com.
Well, you've been to both, Larken. What are the similarities you noticed between going to school and being in? I don't know if it was prison or was it jail. I mean, it was a misdemeanor, so was it just a jail for a year?
It was pretend prison. It was a minimum security prison camp.
Prison camp. Okay.
There literally weren't locks on the doors and wasn't a fence or bar. I could literally have walked away whenever I wanted to. Now, if I had, they would have put out a warrant for my arrest and then put me somewhere nastier.
Right.
So I didn't. But it's basically where they keep people who everybody knows don't belong in prison. There aren't fights there. It's very not scary compared to, higher security places. It's not fun and it's completely idiotic. But it struck me most how it's almost exactly like school. The people in charge are stupid bureaucrats. They make you do idiotic, pointless things. If you're lucky, you can find a way to do something productive when they're not looking. But the whole tone, the whole feel of it was exactly the same. And it wasn't, I'm not even sure I'd say it's worse. I think school I found worse than prison. Again, this was minimum security prison.
Well, school, you got a 12-year sentence.
Right. Yeah, it was longer, but you get to go home in between. But it really is the same setting because the message is you're here and you're under our control and we have the right to do this to you. And they have counts where you have to stand there and they go around and count all of you. And invariably the rocket scientists who work for the prisons get it wrong the first one or two times because they can't count to 100. So you stand there for a half an hour while these complete morons pretend to have the right to control your life, just like school. But I was amazed that the tone, just the feel of the place was just school again.
What did the other inmates think, though? Did you have conversations with them? Was it?
Yeah.
Were they aware how ridiculous this whole thing was, or were they under the impression, I got to start doing right, I got to live my life better and follow the rules?
Well, there's a full range. First of all, people who do violent crimes don't go to minimum security camp. So this was mostly drug offenders. They had some stuff that the politicians say don't have that. So now they're in a cage. And most of them were there a lot longer than I was. My sentence was 15 months. I didn't start any fights, so that came down to just over a year. But most of them had been in there longer than I was, and they had sentences longer than mine. And there's the whole range of the Stockholm syndrome, of the ones who totally take on the role of prisoners like that's what they're supposed to be. And they bow, and they want the approval of the masters. And there are some of them. Most of them at that point seem to understand it's just an idiotic joke. Like, it isn't doing anybody good. Nobody's being protected by having the people in there who are in there. Like, if you actually needed protection, there would be a fence around them or something. It's just a stupid waste of time. And most of the people in there know it. interestingly, I think a higher percentage of the people in that prison have a better understanding of what's going on than the general public.
How so?
Because the general public so much bows to authority and they want the approval of the guy with the badge. Mm-hmm. And the people in there are just sort of, the guards can tell you what to do, and if you don't, then they can, send you to a worse place or whatever.
Their slave status is more obvious.
Right. The slave status is more obvious, and they figure it out, and they most of them stop acting like they're beholden. They don't treat the quote-unquote guards with respect, and the guards absolutely don't deserve it. They're just stupid, power-happy morons. They don't contribute anything to the prison or society or anything else. They're just parasites. And people in prison, most of them eventually figure out, like, you walk around trying to look important with your fancy uniform while we're wearing these stupid rags to try to make us feel beneath you, but there isn't anybody beneath you. If you're a prison guard, you can't get lower than that. And, some of them are nice. There's a whole range of guards, too, that some of them are on a power trip, which is sort of funny at a minimum security prison camp because they can't do much of anything to you. But some are like, oh, very important, and some are just sort of, yeah, I know this is stupid, but it's a job. I get paid to do it, whatever.
Right. They're in it for that fat government paycheck and get to retire in 20 years and have a pension and all that good stuff. Let me play Jon Stewart for a moment here and just say, well, what would we do then? Don't we need prisons? Don't we need to keep murderers and rapists and everything locked up? Doesn't society need to do that?
There are people that I would use force to keep them out of my neighborhood. If people are running around, raping and murdering and stuff like that. But the prison system as it is now, I think, is just about the least effective, least efficient way you could deal with any kind of criminal in the world. I happen to believe there are some people so bad that they don't ever get to play in society again. And whether that means they die or they live forever in a very secure cage, depends basically on whether anybody else is silly enough to voluntarily pay for their food and housing. Don't force me to pay for it. But I think the whole environment, the authoritarian caged animal environment of prison, and this is sort of becoming conventional wisdom, that if somebody's like a petty crook, you put them in prison, then they're a really bad guy.
Right.
If somebody's a really bad guy and you put them in there, they're a complete, malicious, sadistic psycho. It doesn't fix anybody. Occasionally it scares somebody and tortures them enough that they might behave a little better when they come out, although that hardly ever happens. The recidivism rate is huge because people don't go in there and learn how to be good human beings. The way to learn how to be a good human being is to see other people behaving as good human beings. Mm-hmm. Like a kid who grows up in a family where people treat each other with respect, he's pretty likely to turn out okay. Kid who grows up and all around him is violence and stupidity and might makes right, that's what he's going to learn. Well, guess what you learn in prison? Violence and stupidity and might makes right. You learn it from the establishment, from the guards, from the other inmates. It's nobody turns into a human. There are a few examples of people who, by some bizarre miracle, manage to just tune out the entire world around them, go inside themselves, and make themselves into decent human beings. I know a lot of people pretend to do that who probably didn't, but I think that sometimes happens. But I don't think it's because of prison. I think it's in spite of it, in spite of being in this. Well, it might sort of inversely because of being in prison. Just you see the utter insanity of that setting and you think, man, there's got to be a better way for human beings to exist.
Right.
And then figuring it out inside your own head. But it certainly isn't learning by example that prison ever makes anybody better at anything other than being a nasty, heartless crook.
Right. Well, like you said, violence and stupidity and might makes right. I mean, that sounds like the idea of Washington, D.C. in a nutshell.
Yep.
How else has the government or authority tried to keep you down besides jail? Have you been fairly unscathed since you got out, or have they tried to do anything else? Any kind of probation, anything like that?
I had probation for a year afterwards. That was mostly just sort of boring and stupid paperwork, and every once in a while I'll come in and give them some urine, which I was happy to give them. I may have delivered it slightly differently if it was up to me, but anyway.
Piss directly on them.
Right. But they did a nifty trick before I went in, which was the judge made it clear through judge talk that either you're going to give the IRS a huge pile of money and be in a cage for a year, or you're not going to and be in for 5 years. So they did their extortion routine and basically financially ruined us. We had no debts. We owned our house outright. And they made sure that ever since then we've been in really bad shape financially. And every once in a while they harass us again and do some little terrorist routine, and the IRS will make something up just to be a pain in the butt.
Really? Of course, because they want everyone to be in debt. They want everyone to be stuck to their mortgages, stuck to their houses.
Right.
And so that they have to be dependent on the authority to make sure that their lives are okay.
Right. And so you owe your soul to the bankers and the politicians. Exactly. and all that.
So that you're not independent, because financial freedom gives you a good portion of real freedom and gives you a taste for it as well.
Right. So you keep people thinking that they owe, whether it's the politicians or the banks or both, and they're sort of forever your slave. But yeah, the control freaks, occasionally they do some harassment fascist routine to try to pester me or harass me, but I just sort of get used to it. I sort of came to the conclusion that if it comes to it and they want to kill me, it's not that hard a thing to do. They know where I live. I don't hide. And oh well. So far they haven't tried that. They'll harass me and they'll demonize me and say nasty things about me and pester me and stuff. But I'm sort of the opinion that, well, if there's a town thug or bully and you go out and say, hey, he's a thug and a bully, like, what do you expect him to? He's not going to be happy about it. He's going to be nasty to you.
Right.
I am grateful that I live in a place where so far, usually, if you criticize the control freaks, they don't just kill you. And in a lot of the world, throughout a lot of history, if you did that, you just get killed.
Are you worried that that's going to become more of a problem, or are you more hopeful? I feel like things are on the up and up, but I'm an eternal optimist. So I think eventually, at least within my lifetime, maybe near the end of my lifetime, if anything, people will sort of start to realize it and get it. How do you feel? Do you feel it's going to get a lot better before it gets worse, or do you not see a light at the end of the tunnel? What's your thoughts on the future of people realizing their own slavery and trying to throw off the yokes?
Here's the bizarre paradox that I see. The way it's going to get a lot is by getting a lot worse. Basically, the American empire, the U.S. tyrants, the first book I wrote was called How to Be a Successful Tyrant. And the U.S. tyrants are making the same mistake that every tyrant in history makes. And they just never have the self-control to not make this mistake, which is they grab a lot of power very slowly, systematically over time. They grab a lot of power. At some point, their victims, their subjects start to say, this is getting uncomfortable. We're getting a little bit upset. If the tyrants were smart enough to back off a little bit and then start inching forward again, they'd be set. But they don't. They always jump ahead. And if you look at Bush and now Obama, it's just stampede towards totalitarianism. And the good news is that is the stupidest thing a tyrant can ever do, because it's always what ends up being the downfall, because they always grab so fast that suddenly all the proverbial boiled frogs, they suddenly notice and say, wait, this is horrible. I'm not putting up with this. The stupid thing they just passed of, now we can just detain you as long as we want without charging with anything. And, all the garbage in the Patriot Act. It's waking up people who, if they took their time and did it slower, the tyrants could have gotten all the way there with most people never noticing.
Right.
So I think it getting really bad is what has to happen to make enough people start thinking about things that they start looking into, well, what is freedom and what is this government thing and why are we beholden to it at all? And
right.
It does things as ridiculous as, the bailouts. Like, oh my gosh, things are getting bad, so we're going to steal trillions of dollars from all the normal people to give to these gigantic banks.
Right. And then everybody called their congressman and said, no, do not do this. We will kick you out of office. So they didn't. They didn't vote for it the first time, and then they came back and said, "Oh well, we're going to steal the money anyway."
Right, now we have to do it this way, and they try to change it. But I mean, when you're a tyrant and you do something that obviously against the interest of your victims, suddenly your victims start saying, "Wait, he's not there to serve us. He's stomping on us and robbing us and serving his fellow gazillionaire control freak buddies."
Right.
And it starts to wake people up. Even the dimmest person in the world can sort of grasp that if he's working really hard and they just stole his money to give to Bank of America or whatever, something's probably wrong with that situation.
Right. And of course, I think there's an element of the tyrants being a little bit reactionary now. There is a movement, there's sort of a phase change going on in people's minds, maybe not as much as it needs to be right now, and maybe not everybody's on the same page philosophically, but people are really upset. You had the Arab Spring, you've got Occupy Wall Street, and while I may not agree with everybody's solutions, people are visibly upset, and they're in the streets right now.
Right.
And I think that's leading the government to tighten down even more. They're militarizing their police even more. They're passing things like the NDAA, and now SOPA's, going to be passed probably this month or next month. And I think that's a big red line for a lot of people. When people start not being able to go on Wiki or Facebook or YouTube, because that's what most people do now with their days, people are really going to get upset. What do you think? What do you think the SOPA Act, if it passes and the government starts blacklisting websites? We all know that they've wanted to shut down the internet or control the internet or have a gatekeeper, as Hillary Clinton says, for a while. Do you think this is them going whole hog and saying it's time to stop this? We need to take control back of people's minds.
Yeah, well, I think it's them trying to jump ahead, and it's totally going to backfire. I'm no, hacker geek guy, but I would put my money on the hacker geeks way before I'd put my money on the entire NSA and CIA and the whole lot of the parasites. Whatever they try to do, it's going to fail horribly. The people, they didn't invent the internet. They don't have a leash on it. It's going to get away, and they're not nearly going to be able to control it. I hope they do it. I hope they try it, just because it'll upset so many people. Here's the thing. If I was, and I used to hesitate to say this because I thought, the politicians might actually take my advice. They won't. They're way too stupid. They're way too stupid and short-sighted. If a politician or a party came along and said, we're going to slash all taxes 30% across the board. We're going to forgive you half your bank debts. We're going to do away with the Patriot Act. We're going to just way hack back all the garbage they've been stampeding forward on. Whichever party did that would be in power for the next 100 years. But they're all too stupid. They don't know when to give up a little bit of power in exchange for the ultimate goal of having it all. And I'm thrilled that they don't. I'm thrilled to death that they're too stupid and they're jumping forward and angering everybody. I love it. I love watching it.
What about Ron Paul? I mean, he has sort of said what you're going to say, or what you say they should do. He says he wants to cut $1 trillion, destroy or obliterate 5 government departments. Obviously, that's not anarchy as you and I would envision it, but it's a step in the right direction. Obviously, the party hasn't embraced that. But what do you think about Paul? And are you hopeful for a win? Do you think that'd even be a good thing if he won?
I don't. A few different parts of that. I don't even think it would be a step in the right direction. I think it would be sort of a delay of getting all the way in the right direction by backing things up and letting the tyrants crawl forward if he could get his way. However, even if some miracle occurs and he's elected, there is no way he's going to get anything he wants because he's not running for emperor. He's running for president.
Well, the modern American president has some imperial powers. For instance, Paul could get rid of every executive order immediately.
Now that would be funny. That would be fun to watch him.
The contradiction.
I send you a copy of The Iron Web. It's my novel. I don't want to say too much about it and spoil it. It reminded me of that. So he could do some damage. Frankly, one of the reasons I don't want him to win is I don't want him to die. I totally believe that if he won, they would just kill him, which again would upset a lot of people and may help the freedom movement. But I don't really want Ron Paul to die.
Right, he's a really nice guy.
Because I think he's totally honest and principled. He's a constitutionalist statist, so he does. That's not what I believe in. But I think it's a miracle anybody could be in Washington that long and still have a shred of principle.
Right.
And he has all of his. He's been consistent for 12 zillion years.
Right.
And keeps saying and doing the same things. But ultimately, I don't think that does any good. I think it basically uses up, and I know a lot of people get mad when I say this, it uses up the energy and the effort and the time of a lot of people who think they're pushing for freedom. But what it comes down to is, as long as you are begging the master for freedom, you're not free, no matter what he says. And if you're saying, we want a really nice master in there, yeah, he might not whip you as hard. In the short run, it may feel more comfortable. But if you think the solution is to have a new master, you're not even trying for freedom. You're just trying for slavery light. And I don't think slavery light is fundamentally different from regular slavery. I want all the way freedom. We don't bow to anybody. We don't get robbed by anybody.
You're listening to the Freedom Fiends podcast, available from freedomfiends.com. That's FREEDOMFEENS.com.
Where should we spend all that energy then? What do you think the practical steps are?
Here's one little example. Let's say there are 10 million people who really support Ron Paul. And I think it's probably a bunch more than that, but let's say 10 million. What if instead of campaigning and spreading the word and donating his campaign and bumper stickers and all that, 10 million people said, why are we doing that? Don't give money to the IRS. If 10 million people said we're just not going to pay, that is the end of the federal income tax. There is nothing in the world that people in power could do. And it's a perfect example of why the belief in authority is the problem, because those 10 million people squander their power when they throw all their energy into begging the masters to let them keep what they earn. Just keep what you earn. There's 10 million of you. What do you think they're going to do to 10 million people? But even the people who are out there screaming for freedom are so stuck in the mindset that we have to have a ruling class and we have to bow to it. And that the way out of this is to get the ruling class to tell us we're allowed to be free, that they just end up shooting themselves in the foot and getting nowhere.
Right.
Where if they just said, I'm going to be free, I'm going to act like I'm free, and I'll defend myself if they come try to stomp on me, it literally wouldn't even take a revolution. You know, if 10 million people said, I'm not playing your game and you really don't want to mess with all 10 million of us, we're just not paying you anymore. We don't care what your legislation says. We don't need you to repeal anything. We just repealed it by disobeying it out of existence. If they did that, the people who will, sorry to be rude, but the people who will accomplish absolutely nothing by supporting Ron Paul could end the IRS today by disobedience.
So it's sort of like the quote-unquote illegal immigrants do. You know, there's 30 million of them. They can't really do anything with them. They can't send them all back, right? So in essence, it's like that. If enough people withdraw their consent, then the government doesn't have a leg to stand on or money to buy an artificial leg.
Right. And we do have historical examples like alcohol prohibition. You know, in the end, Congress pretended it was their idea to repeal it. They didn't repeal it. The people repealed it by saying, we're going to disobey, and when your revenues show up, we're going to tar and feather them and occasionally kill one. And when you try to prosecute someone for having some booze, we're going to say not guilty, even if he was obviously guilty. And so the people did away with prohibition, and sort of after the fact, Congress took it off the books to make it look like it was their idea. But they suddenly felt their own power and realized they're just this dumb little dot, like the video, the tiny dot. We don't need their permission if we all understand that we don't have to obey them. Just disobey. Now, again, if one person or 10 or 100 does that, they send out their Gestapo and stomp on them and say, here's what happens if you disobey. If 1 million or 10 million or 100 million people just say, yeah, you can't have my money and you can't tell me what to do anymore, that's the end. They don't have the resources to do anything about that. Their power is 100% illusion. The fact that their victims hallucinate that control to be legitimate and feel an obligation to obey. If tomorrow everybody woke up and they knew the IRS was there and they were just, oh, they might hurt me, but they felt no obligation, no moral obligation to pay, that's the end.
Okay. Okay.
200 million of us would say, no, we're not going to, you suck at spending money. You can't have ours anymore.
Well, this brings me to a question that my co-host Michael had for you. And then after we get into this, I've got sort of a follow-up that also ties into this. Michael asks, well, he says he agrees with you that taxes are unethical. He's asking if you're selling books, you're still selling books and doing videos telling people to do what you did that puts you in jail. And I guess by that he means willfully not filing taxes.
No. I must object.
Okay.
Even before I did what I did, what I said publicly is what I still say now. Hey, everybody, watch this and don't do this. There are a lot of people out there who sold things as if they had an answer. And, do my program and you'll be safe. And,
right.
And from the beginning, I said, I'm going to show you what the law says and show you they're defrauding you. If you follow the law, they're going to hate you and they're going to try to hurt you. Now, if enough people did it, they can't do anything. But I'm going to volunteer to be the guinea pig because I ran full-page ads saying, dear federal government, please prosecute me. I wanted to be the guinea pig for that issue because I hadn't really prosecuted anybody for that issue before. I didn't want somebody else to have to go through that and say, well, that guy said this. I knew the issue forward and backward and thought I had the best chance. I still think I had the best chance. It's just a matter of having 12 complete morons. One person with a brain on a jury might have turned out differently. But I never said, I have the magic way to save you from the IRS. A lot of people do that, including some people who agreed with my legal conclusions. And I would complain at them and say, don't tell people that just because you know the truth, you're safe from parasites and thieves. When has that ever been the case? Mm-hmm. Voltaire, 12 zillion years ago, said it's dangerous to be right when the government's wrong. And I said that all along, before my trial, during it, afterwards. I'm not saying, hey, everybody, do this and you'll be safe. I do sometimes say, hey, if you have to, if you learn this and feel obligated to not let yourself be defrauded, it's going to be dangerous, but, I'm not going to try to talk you out of it. I will say there are definitely risks, as I demonstrated. But I never pretended to have some magic formula to save people from the extortion racket. They're extortionists.
Right.
There aren't so many people in the movement seem to think that if you say the right magic words, at some point all the parasites, the IRS and the courts and the politicians will all say, oh, gosh, you found out the secret. Oh, you can go. No, that is not going to happen no matter how right you are, no matter what you say.
So what's your goal then in educating people in this? Is your goal to educate enough people to where we do have the numbers or there are the numbers for all of us to withdraw consent?
Yeah, on the tax thing, I hardly ever talk about it anymore just because I don't see it going anywhere. Mm-hmm. The people who don't acknowledge that the politicians are their masters, they don't need that issue. It is sort of trivial. The
right.
people who do think they're beholden to government, they don't care about the issue. They don't pay attention to it. I mean, again, I don't want to get into the whole legal thing and waste time on that, but it was a huge amount of evidence. It lays out this 100-year fraud, all the cover-up of every year and how they changed this and moved this. It's just an obvious, intentional crime what they did using the tax laws, and most people didn't care. All they could process was, but if we don't pay, that's the end of the world, and I pay my taxes. And so all the evidence, going into it for years, and I wasn't the only one. I wasn't the only one who found it. I wasn't the first one who found the issue. I certainly wasn't the only one. Spreading all the evidence around, and the government knew, and it proved beyond a shadow of doubt, it didn't need a rebuttal. It didn't have to refute the evidence. All it had to do was say, good people pay, and if you don't, you'll get in trouble. That's all that matters to most Americans. So I just sort of gave up talking about it. I hardly ever talk about it anymore because it's basically like I can go up to somebody and say, look, I have complete absolute proof that your neighbor has been robbing you. And they say, but I like my neighbor. I don't want to look at the proof. And so I got to the point where I just said, well, what's the point of showing them the proof? Right. There's the group of people who already gave up their belief in authority. They don't need it because it's basically a triviality. And there's the people still who bow to the politicians, and they don't want it. They don't want to know that the masters they think are going to save them from reality are the biggest crooks on the planet. So they literally they can't look at the evidence I put in front of them, so I just stopped putting it in front of them. It's still out there. I mean, if people go to larkenrose.com, my taxable income report is still there for free. You can see all the citations and get the whole explanation. It doesn't say, so go and do this. I never gave advice. I never told people what to do. I just said, hey, look at what their law books have said for the last 100 years. It's obviously a fraud and a scam.
Right.
So people can still see it if they want to. But I just sort of found, I mean, in my trial, that was the ultimate example. I had a captive audience of 12 people. And I showed them the citations. Look at what this said. You just heard them say this. Here's their law books directly contradicting what the judge said and what the prosecutor said and what all their witnesses said. This is their law books showing they're wrong. And did it over and over and over again, going through the law books. And I believe this because, look, it says it right there. And instead of rebutting any of it, they just said, we told him he owed. And the jury said, they told you you owed it. Guilty.
Yeah.
So I just, oh well.
So that's the first hurdle then, is to break that illusion, to break that from the people, the belief that they're obedient. But I want to go further than that. If we were able to, say we wake up next year around this time and fully 200 million, 300 million people in the U.S. Decide, we're all anarchists now. The government is completely silly. We don't support them anymore. We're not going to pay our taxes. What kind of drastic steps do you think the government would take? And this is one thing that still I haven't been able to consolidate in my mind. Do you think that they would, use extreme measures, violence, even nukes? Do you think they would obliterate a whole state that wasn't compliant?
Here's the problem with that. I think whatever they would try, we wouldn't even know it happened. And here's why. Human beings are the ones out there enforcing the will of the politicians, which is why I often target, I encourage people to get a copy of The Most Dangerous Superstition and send it to whatever cop whatever soldier because when the thugs out there enforcing the will of the politicians, if they ever come to the realization that, wow, this isn't just, this isn't legitimate, robbing people because the politicians told me to, if the rest of the population figures it out, some of them are going to figure it out too and say, we're going to stop doing this. We're not going to rob you. We're not going to blow you up. We're not going to come to your house with a gun. The cops and the soldiers and all the bureaucrats and the tax collectors, they're just human beings. They tend to be sort of stupid, irresponsible, immoral human beings. But if the rest of the population can figure out that this is a stupid, evil joke, believing we have to bow to this parasite class, then the people actually in the system can start figuring that out too.
Right.
And right now, I think that is the biggest problem facing the American tyrants, is that there are a lot of people inside the military that are coming to realize, there are enemies, foreign and domestic, mostly domestic, and they live in Washington. And I know a bunch of them that now will openly say that and say, I'm not a constitutionalist anymore, but they say, I swear to uphold the Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic, and I know where the enemies are, and they're not in the Middle East in a cave somewhere.
Right. So sort of like in Egypt when the military refused to shoot the folks into Tahrir Square.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're a tyrant and your thugs say, yeah, we're just not going to do this, that's it. I mean, that's a perfect example of how it's all illusion. The illusion in the heads of the enforcers. If the enforcers ever figure out, this is wrong, let's not do this, poof, all of their power is gone without an election, without a revolution, without anything. If their thugs become unindoctrinated and say, I'm not going to, I would still feel justified, going around stopping murders and rapists and thieves and stuff, but I don't like the whole going around stealing money from people because the politicians want more money. I'm not going to do that anymore.
But some of them do like that, though. Some of them get that power and become corrupted just like the thugs do, just like the tyrants do, because they're the ones that get a cut of it. And the tyrants, that's one of the reasons they make sure that, cops have such big salaries and get pensions and can retire and just have to put in their 20 years and then they're set for life.
Right. And there will always, there'll always be some, just like there are, there's some private crooks in the street who you can't talk into being nice guys. It's why I carry a gun. I'll talk them into it with a Glock. And in the end, it may be that there's some complete control freaks who won't give up their effort to dominate their fellow man until somebody just shoots them. But I still have some hope that most of the people who become soldiers, most of the people who become cops, at least to begin with, they did it because they wanted to be the good guys. And we have to keep, while we're telling people that you don't have to obey them and you do have the right to resist them, we should also be telling the thugs themselves, you don't have the right to do this and you don't have to do it. You could be a moral, sane, rational human being, drop the damn badge, and start acting like a human. Mm-hmm. And even if 1 in a zillion listens, even if 1 out of 100 hesitates next time to do what they did after Katrina and go steal everybody's guns. Right. If one cop tells his fellow cops, this is bad, we can't just go disarming people, or we can't just round people up, or we can't just arrest people based on nothing, like no arrest warrant, just somebody said they're a bad guy. If the thugs start thinking about it and not being thugs anymore and start to question it, that's going to spread inside the system. And that's the end. I often talk about the Milgram experiments that Stanley Milgram did of obedience, and I won't go through the whole thing. Actually, my book talks about it. But one of the most encouraging things in there, basically he found that almost everybody, or not a large majority of people, will inflict what they believe is agonizing pain on a complete stranger if an authority figure tells them to.
Right.
And that's Americans, and that's just sad. The one ray of hope in the study was that he showed that if people see one other person stand up to authority and say, this is wrong, I'm not going to do this, suddenly a lot of other people are instantly empowered and say, yeah, it is wrong, I'm not going to do it either. The way I phrase it is, nobody wants to be first, everybody wants to be second. Nobody dare. It's like it doesn't even occur to people that they have a choice to just say, no, that's stupid and evil, I'm not going to do that. But when they hear somebody else say that, whether it's Oath Keepers or Iraq veterans against the war, or, the former soldiers or former cops saying, yeah, this is bad. For too long, we've just done whatever they told us to do. Now we're the bad guys. We really have to back up and reconsider this. If cops and soldiers hear other cops and soldiers saying that, that can start an awakening inside the system. And if that happens, the tyrants are just out of luck. They're doomed.
Wonderful. Love to hear it. That's a great ray of hope. Well, Larken, is there anything else you'd like to add that we missed during the cast? Anything you feel is really important right now to say?
I would... I'll just do a rude plug for my book again.
Well, I was gonna give you a chance to do that next, but you can do it now if you want.
I would. I was going to say something and realize it's going to sound like that, so I'll introduce it as that. I would really encourage people, like everybody out there thinks that they want the right thing. They think they're already pushing for justice. I don't know anybody who's out there saying, yeah, I'm pushing for the wrong thing. Yay. On the left, on the right, everybody involved in politics thinks they're pushing for what's right. And what it says on the back of the book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, what I often tell people is, before you're out there vehemently yelling and screaming and trying to get something to happen, I beg of you to take a few minutes to check and make sure that what you believe and what you're trying to make happen is actually good. Because when I was vehemently a conservative Republican for years and years and didn't examine it, it never occurred to me that I was righteously out there advocating evil, and I was. And now I'm really damn embarrassed about it. And so I beg people, stop pointing the finger at the other guy just long enough to just check. Read The Most Dangerous Superstition, check. Make sure you're actually the good guy, because there's a 99.999% chance that you're going to find out you're not. Not because your intentions are bad, not because your morals are bad, not because you're an evil person, but because you and everyone else was told a lie that is taking your morals and your virtues and your goodness and turning it into power for the most evil people in the world. And if you just dare to re-examine your own belief system, you might be able to get away from that and actually be pushing humanity in the right direction instead of accidentally pushing it down the toilet.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time today, and maybe we can do this again sometime.
It was fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So there you have it. If you'd like to hear more from Larken Rose, go ahead and visit www.larkenrose.com. That's LARKENROSE.com. Also, search him on YouTube. You'll find lots of great videos, including The Tiny Dot, one of me and Michael's favorites. Lots of other great stuff. So go ahead and check it out. That's your homework assignment, Freedom Fiends. Peace.
Since time began, tyrants have taken aim at personal liberties. Now there's a movie that aims back.
The government has no more right to tell us what to put in our bodies than they have to take our guns or tell us what books we can read.
6 drug police were eaten by bears while raiding a marijuana farm.
On your knees, you dirty hippies! Jesus. On your knees! What's the problem, officer?
Today, many cops who enforce pot laws do so only because it provides them with cushy jobs, good benefits, and a chance to push people around.
I was an undercover narcotics officer. The drug war is nothing but a farce.
The Second Amendment says you gotta keep you and your gat intact.
Guns and Weed, The Road to Freedom. A film by Michael W. Dean and Neema Vedadi.
DVD available now at gunsandweed.com or on Amazon. That's gunsandweed.com. Makes the perfect gift. Remember, that's gunsandweed.com.
Hello, Freedom Fiends. It's your boy Dean from the U.S. Get the U.S. out my bloodstream. I owe me and that include endorphins. No one won't ask permission and I won't say please. Freedom fans, one fact that I gotta make clear is...
The Freedom Fiends podcast is covered by a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 3.0 license. Do what you want with it and spread it around. Tell 2 friends. Make copies. Email it to everyone you know. Go on the site and comment. This is a conversation. Every week, we'll have an exciting new episode where Michael W. Dean and Neema Vedadi weave their own unique take on the way the world works and how to find your place in it. Available from freedomfeens.com. That's FREEDOMFEENS.com.
Freedom Fiends is proudly syndicated by Alterati.com, the Micro Effect Radio Network at themicroeffect.com, and the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.
Subscribe and tell 2 friends.